Walt, this week it was CES. Sin City turned into Autonomy City. You were there. Jensen Huang came out and said autonomous vehicles will be the first multi-trillion-dollar robotics industry. Big, bold statement. And on the backside, he said, oh, by the way, our automotive business is only going to be $6 billion in fiscal year 2026. What did you learn at CES?
That statement is true, and it's great for him to say that. And you think about a lot of these companies. I mean, one of the common narratives that I heard, Grayson, was like, we have enough money for the next year or two, but we're going to raise some more money this year. And the milestone is going to be, hey, we're going to go drive her out at some point during the year or whatever it is. Different company, different milestone. But that's the common theme. It's beneficial for all of these companies to be able to raise money if you're kind of the godfather of AI. Jensen is saying this is the best or one of the largest multi-trillion-dollar opportunities. And that's 100% true. On top of that, what the industry needs to do a better job at, and there was one panel where they did that on, I think Aurora was on this panel, I think Gatik was on this panel, it was Zooks that was on this panel, talking about how, these people are trying to save lives. And this is, an important product to do that. And they need to do a better job at delivering that narrative, which is exactly what we've talked about on this podcast since episode 1 or 2. And in my meetings, I was trying to encourage, a lot of these techie type people that like, it's not, you just don't build a great product and it will come. There's going to be more to it in terms of convincing local regulators as well as just citizens. There was community leaders in a lot of these panels that those cars going down the street that have no drivers in them are going to be good for you and not something to be afraid of. So this is all rooted in the narrative of the industry needs to kind of be pushing on this, like huge to investors, huge expression of AI. Autonomy is a huge expression of AI. It's also a major life-saving opportunity as a new technology investment.
It's an economic growth engine. I harp on that all the time and on this podcast, on the road to autonomy, and as my role as the chair of the Council for Economic Resilience. But yet the industry is very reluctant to push that economic message. Why is that? Did you hear that start to change at all at CES?
My sense was, the people that are in public affairs or regulatory kind of get it. Now it's just they need to get, I think, their management teams out there more. And look, one of the things, my impression of this, I've been going to this thing. I've been doing this for 30 years, Grayson. As many of our listeners may not know, I came out of the wireless industry. So it's been like wireless and space and things like that. So my presence at CES, I've probably been there 20 plus times, has been on the other side of the halls. And it used to be on this side of the hall, it was like cars that had screens in them. So now that you have these autonomy people there, incredible the brains and the missions that the executives of these companies have. But there has to be, some, I think, partnership and better communication about what they're trying to achieve beyond some panel at CES. So I think that's got to improve, and some of this is just sharing more data as they progress along their path.
Is that where Deere comes in? Deere's out there. They had a whole bunch of toys that they showed off. They had the autonomous mower. They had another autonomous tractor. They had an autonomous dump truck. They had a tractor just dedicated for orchards, but they were out there talking about the farmer shortage, which is well-documented issue. That resonates with individuals that buy Deere tractors and so buy Deere autonomous tractors. Is Deere leading the way on the narrative?
Maybe. I mean, I went up to a couple of the autonomous lawnmowers because I'm like, oh, this could save me money. Like, I don't even care if your battery is 30 minutes. If I owned it, I could just send it out there like every other day. It's electric. My neighbors won't care because the noise factors look. These things are a couple of years out, Grayson. I don't think it's near term. Maybe not for Deere. Maybe not for Deere. I mean, I didn't talk to them, but I visited a couple of those booths. But look, the bigger point here, and I think it's more appropriate for me to pivot that into talking about trucking. You're talking about the lack of farmers. How about the lack of truck drivers and the autonomy companies that are going after that space? It's the same concept, though, right? Where it's increasing productivity in an area, whether it's on farms, delivering goods from point A to point B, where you're already struggling with labor, and the labor that you have now, great people, but you can help to improve their safety and the other people on the road if you apply these technologies.
Over the road, if you're going to do the cross country, the tandem, the Covenant's known for, it's a great opportunity because there is a massive driver shortage there. Okay, you want to push back Dooner, you want to push back freight waves. There is a driver shortage, point blank. There, I said it. I defended Walt. The technology is coming because when we have a driver shortage, we have a lack of trucks, a lack of drivers. It drives up the cost, and what happens when the cost goes up? Inflation. Autonomous trucking will damper and blunt inflation. Imagine if we had autonomous trucking during the pandemic. Autonomous trucks would go in the ports. Sorry, unions. The autonomous trucks are good for the economy. They go in the ports, they load them up, they take them out. We wouldn't have had as big of inflation if we had autonomous trucks.
So expression of AI saves lives, increases productivity, right? I mean, for economic growth. And then, to cap it all off, if it's occurring in this country, because it's happening in China, right? I didn't really bother much with the Chinese companies because it's not in my investment ability or interest, frankly. But look, it is happening there, and to some extent. And there are other countries in the world that are going to be willing to buy those products. So, for us to help this development for U.S. companies, particularly, to compete so that they can sell their products or technologies into Europe and other non-Chinese markets before China invades effectively with their own products in those markets. Also an important element to this overall narrative that exists.
Because if America does not put together the regulatory environment that embraces autonomy, China will become the largest exporter in the world of autonomous vehicles and autonomous trucks. And then America is at a strategic disadvantage. And that could all change on January 20th if President Trump signals his desire to usher in the autonomy economy.
Yeah, and it's not just trucks, too. It's obviously extends to cars, right? And on the consumer side of things as well, which brings up an interesting segue, although segue was there, pun not intended. Zeekr had a booth, and more interestingly to me, in the Waymo booth, they showed the Zeekr product itself. So, Grayson, this prediction that you had that they were going to get shut down is not looking good. Waymo has no, if they thought that there was an issue, I'm not sure that they'd have it on the trade show floor. Although I didn't see many. Well, there was a fair amount of government people going around. But my impression of seeing this product live for the first time was not a pretty car. I mean, very bulky. The sensors on this thing, and if you haven't seen them, you can check out my Twitter where I posted a picture of it. Massive. Seats didn't look that comfortable. There was a Zeekr person there that I was talking to, and they wouldn't let you actually in the car to sit in it. I'm talking about the Zeekr version that was for Waymo, but it was like a flat seat. It's like, oh, our cars don't kind of go around bends, so you need like a curved seat for cars that are going around turns. I'm like, I think they're gonna make turns, so I wasn't quite sure how that worked out. But it's just interesting that Waymo would have been showing the Zeekr product. Other thing I would say as it relates to that, Grayson, is basically anything that wasn't an OEM, any self-built autonomous vehicle, was the form factor that you in the early podcast of Autonomy Markets have spoken against, which looks like the Zooks, 2 to 3 people facing each other. I saw these things all over the place. That seems to be the form factor of choice, for something that's not going to be like an OEM that has ADAS or some level of autonomy. What say you? Are you going to take back your criticism of this? Because everyone seems to like it except for you, at least on the manufacturing side of things.
I have very strong opinions, and I stand by my opinions.
Okay.
And I'm not budging. The Zeekr vehicle is ugly. It's not sexy. It's ugly. Do you want to go pick up a date in the Zeekr vehicle? No, you want to go pick it up in a snazzy looking mobile. You don't want to go in the Zeekr mobile.
There might be an ugly version of the toaster box that you have largely denigrated. Like, for example, Glideways has the same version of it, but it's a beautiful egg. It's a little thinner. It's a different business model, but I thought that was it was almost, I was talking to one of the design engineers for Glideways. I'm like, you overbuilt this thing, man. It's like too good. You need to lower the cost. I talked to the design person at Zooks, and we were talking about why you have these bulky sensors, and it's more of like swapping things out, swiping things in and out, which just tells you that the sensors, the decision on how they're going to use sensors, hasn't changed. Not that they will or won't use LiDAR, but just, it's more easy to change them out if they're bolted on the side and external, as opposed to integrate into these ground up designs of products.
You say that, and so Zoox puts very few people in the vehicle at CES, but they put the Today Show. They go for a ride, and then at the end of the clip, this individual says, "Well, I hope the person doesn't smell sitting across from me. I really don't want to be comfortable sitting across from somebody."
No, are you kidding me?
Yes, and this is on mainstream TV.
Who said that? One of the hosts from the Today Show said that?
Yes, well, it was in the vehicle. Yes, sorry. Actually, no, I take that back. It was CBS This Morning with Michael Strahan. Yes.
Oh, when Michael Strahan said that? That's hilarious.
The host was there, said it. So it was CBS. It wasn't Today's Show. Sorry, Today's Show. Yes, and that was there on live TV, and I watched it. Nobody wants to face one another. So the Zeekr vehicle, you don't face one another. But what Waymo did, Waymo validated my point. China will become the largest exporter of autonomous vehicles if President Trump doesn't do something. The Zeekr Waymo vehicle is a Chinese export. All it's going to take to derail that vehicle is for America First PAC to run billboards, ads, targeted ads, over-the-air ads, and says, guess what? You ride in the Waymo vehicle, China will spy on you. That's the end of that vehicle. It's over. That's all it takes.
It's funny you say that, because this morning I've been listening to the Supreme Court battle over TikTok, and this concept of is it freedom of speech? Oh, you're restricting the content, the content creators. Like, no, we're not restricting the content creators, and China as a country doesn't have freedom of speech to manipulate how the TikTok algo will work. I mean, I think the other thing that I will say, given some of your criticisms of Zook, that was, I think, interesting to me is I was at a panel, and Ron Thaniel at Zook's, he's very visionary, he talks very slow, he's a very good presenter, but he's like, Zook's is in the market today. We love Las Vegas. It's right here. And I'm thinking to myself, like, no, you're not. Like, I can't go out and just hop in a Zook's. Like, you're not there today. You're not the first company there today. You're not letting anyone in other than your employees, I guess, right? So I didn't really know what that meant, but I will say that he would be a good overall spokesman, just because he talks about saving lives and things like that. But you might want to be a little bit more accurate about what being in the market actually means, because here on Autonomy Markets, we don't consider you to have something launched until I can go there in an app and get in that car myself without having someone like usher me in from management, but literally on the consumer side. Like, obviously trucking is a different thing, but that's what being launched in a market means. And no, you're not there anywhere.
They're not there, and I'll take it one step further for the definition of autonomy markets. When a commercial transaction occurs, when we have to pay for that ride, then you're in the market, and then you're operating.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you would think that they would all do that. The other part of, so again, getting back to the Zeekr and the Zooks and having the external sensors and just this whole kind of narrative of like, we're still I don't want to say work in progress, but there's still opportunity for component share to change over time. I'm just going to come back to this. I think I addressed this on a previous LiDAR. I think, people get very emotional about Elon. I don't think he's so dug in that there's not an opportunity for them who already use LiDAR to determine whether their cameras are working well. Like, they buy Luminar LiDARs, probably a lot of them, to test how good their cameras are working. But I'm going to go a step further and say Waymo, who kind of like builds everything from the ground up, kind of an Elon version of it, and has their own LiDAR. If Luminar or someone else in the market makes a better product, there's an opportunity, I think, especially if, like, we don't know exactly why Waymo has not yet launched on freeways as we determine launching, meaning a paying customer. Maybe it's that they do need a better LiDAR that looks with better quality over longer distance. So there's, I think, an opportunity for third parties to come in to Waymo or as a new component into Tesla. And certainly, for the OEMs that are partnering with technology companies, whether in the trucking or the auto side. So I think we're still early stages where there's opportunity for share changes in how that works. What are your thoughts on that?
My opinion on Waymo, and I have no insight into this, is just an opinion that I believe that they're taking an abundance of caution because they're so far ahead in terms of the leadership. They're taking abundance of caution. I don't have any technical insight of what it was. I just believe they're taking an abundance of caution as it relates to long range LiDAR. 4 years ago, 3 years ago, when Aurora acquired Blackmore, and they made the long range LiDAR technology, and they brought that in house. That was what Chris Urmson wrote a long blog post on it when they did. It was a really good read, by the way. For the independent LiDAR companies, I don't see them surviving. I think that they're going to have to get gobbled up by a Vallejo, by a Bosch, by a Magna, and live inside of the tier one, the tier two component providers. I don't see them surviving as independent companies long term.
I don't necessarily agree with that. Let alone the fact that LiDAR is, even in an end-to-end solution, is definitively not going to be involved. Because if cost is the issue, and I spent some time with Luminar and saw how the product has shrunk, how the cost has been reduced. I can physically see, dude, like the components that were reduced and how they moved to ASIC chips. And it's, I don't want to say commoditized, because obviously it's still a system that they're going to have to deal with. I just think there is an opportunity for them. Again, let's flip it here as well. Let's go the opposite way and say everyone hates Elon because it serves their business interests. And like if FSD 13, which is not necessarily fully autonomous yet, but it actually results in increased sales of Teslas, which is what we've talked about in recent episodes. That's actually good for all of these LiDAR suppliers and everyone else, because it's going to put more pressure on the OEMs, and the OEMs are the ones that are going to get hurt by Tesla gaining share, having more growth. They've already seen that EV has not led to sales. That's been a huge disappointment. But all of a sudden, if the market tells them that AV, and again, not full autonomy, but like better ADAS is a reason for someone to buy their cars or upgrade an existing car, because again, the industry does better at saying how it's saving lives, and it just, it's a better overall experience, which I've seen personally and I haven't even gotten to FSD 13. There's an opportunity for, like a Luminar or whoever to sell, their systems in there today. Over the long term, is it possible they are acquired or whatever? Sure. But like, and I'm not saying that this is a direct comparison, because, I don't know enough about LiDAR yet. But for years when I covered Qualcomm, companies would be like, we hate Qualcomm. They're too expensive. The royalty rates are too high. And they would say, we're going to design a chip. Like Motorola used to do this all the time. We're going to design a chip and design Qualcomm. And they never were able to do it because it wasn't necessarily the best technology. You had a best in class focus on reducing the cost, having the best performance. And if it was not at a cost that was going to be detrimental to you, there's an opportunity for them to, I think, succeed.
In theory, you're correct. However, not one global legacy OEM has ever been able to build a successful autonomous vehicle autonomy program. Ford shut down Argo. GM shut down Cruise. VW's, their Carrot division is it's a mess.
I don't care what's happened in the past, Grayson, because the automotive market, it's all about what's happening in the future. And the automotive market is changing. And again, we talked about this on last week's podcast. If we realize that like this is going to be a critical year for these OEMs in terms of what is the next step. Just because things have not worked in the past doesn't mean they're not important to work in the future. And you yourself, have criticized GM for killing Cruise and not building for the futures. Look, you look at the most successful people in our society, they have failed, right? And it's not about whether you win, it's about how you react and how you pivot after failures. So I think just because it hasn't worked in the past, that's not a reason that there's not going to be pressure and reinvestment to get there in the future.
But you're missing the key ingredient, culture. Traditional OEMs are not, outside of China, their culture is not meant to build, it's not meant to innovate. It's the way all it is managing the balance sheet with zero to little to no innovation.
So the company that gets hurt from that, first of all, I don't disagree. You're 100% right. There's a cultural issue which reminds me of like the cultural issue that exists at Boeing, right? And why SpaceX is kicking their ass. But there's a third party here that gets negatively impacted if the culture doesn't change, and these OEMs do not enable a fragmented autonomous market, and that company is Uber. And I think that's another thing that I saw throughout this conference, that Uber is very active with all of these companies in trying to make sure that that ecosystem exists. And look, it could be that you have the autonomy company here, technology-wise. You've got Uber, and they're like dragging that OEM in, but there's still like that fourth piece that's missing, which is who's going to own the fleet. Like Uber doesn't want to own the fleet. The OEM doesn't want to own the fleet. Like the autonomy company, most of them, if they wanted to own it, they couldn't afford it anyway. Like you still need that kind of fourth leg in the wheel. Maybe they'll all chip in a little bit. So there is still a hole missing, but I think Uber can kind of be the instigation, hopefully, to try and change the culture of some of these companies. And I think, like we've talked about before, I think Uber has a desire to get to. I'm going to change what I said before. It's not number of cars. It's trips, right? Because if you think about it, one Uber driver or one autonomous car is probably equal to 4 or 5 Uber drivers, because the Uber driver is only 3 hours, whatever it is, a day. So, how many trips or even hours spent, but trips and hours spent will probably be, the same ratio. So maybe that's what's going to help to change the culture at the OEMs.
Or do you even need the OEMs? Could Uber cut a deal with Foxconn as a contract manufacturer and put a neural system or a wave system on there? Now, if I'm a legacy automaker, I've got a lot bigger problem now, because a lot of those vehicles go into fleets and Uber just TKO'd them then.
Yeah. So otherwise stated, let's say the fourth guy comes in who's the money man on owning the fleet, and they're just like, well, why, if I'm owning the fleet, why am I even bothering with this legacy OEM? Why don't we just do a ground up and do a purpose driven vehicle, drive the cost down, get it at 20,000, 25,000, whatever the number is. Yeah. I mean, that certainly could be a path. But again, if that starts to happen, that's the stuff that puts the pressure. And I haven't dealt with these auto companies. Maybe they just can't see the writing that's on the wall. And that will be the end game for them. But there's still an opportunity for them to obviously play a role.
Small role. Here's the person that could really shake it all up. Masa. Masa makes big, outlandish bets. And he's already an investor in Wave. So he's got one part of it. And believe me, I don't think Masa would love anything more than to own the autonomy ecosystem. And a play like that, Masa becomes a very big king on a small hill.
He's a levered player. He's not an asset type owner. Like, he wants to make a lot of money, and just owning assets, he wouldn't want to do that. I think you need to bring in, again, some type of fourth party. Like the suggestion I've historically pushed, this probably has no momentum, but like getting some type of favorable tax treatment like you have for physical assets, like we have with towers in the wireless industry, to fund that infrastructure. There are business models out there that will work. It's gonna take some time, but I don't discount the OEMs as much as you do, and I think for Uber, I think they realize the value of making sure that the OEMs have the right technology partners as well.
The traditional OEMs have one thing that the startup OEMs don't have: cost structure. And I will caveat with saying Rivian, with the deal that they cut with the unions, is going to have a very bad cost structure going forward. Cost structure is going to be a determining factor to see truly how this scales. Tesla does not have the cost structure of traditional legacy. And I'm going to throw a random curveball at you, because they don't have this cost structure either. Lucid. And Lucid's got the PIF behind them. When do they make a play?
Those could be the disruptors. I don't disagree. I think, again, people are putting companies like that in the penalty box because EV didn't sell. And, maybe AV is the difference in terms of what gets people to buy it. And again, to our listeners, I'm not saying Lucid has to have hands off, like, immediately something that is a robotaxi and a fleet, but, maybe an advanced ADAS, and you're just now getting some of these more advanced services implemented in car because the design cycle is so long. Maybe there's a shift there. We'll have to say.
Or do they follow the route that Aurora is doing with Continental and NVIDIA, they're going to launch and Volvo, they're going to launch a fully commercialized truck in 2027 for scale. That's automotive grade. That's a really good, healthy three-way combo. Does that combo start to accelerate into vehicles?
Trucking, I think, is something just so different in that where the volumes are, where the average price is of the truck, where the end customer has the balance sheet in this case to buy it. And if they don't, these trucking companies, in my understanding, have a whole business in leasing, right? And that's a very, large component of how, so the business model, and which is probably why a lot of these ex-Uber ATG people and Google people have kind of gravitated to that market as the opportunity for autonomy. Not to mention the things you said earlier in the podcast about, the lack of trucking drivers and things like that. A lot of my meetings, I tried to push them and like, oh, what's step 2? And like, how does this, revert back to cars? And no one wanted to go there because they're doing a good job of staying on message and saying like, look, this is what we're going to do. This market's huge. Let's excel there. But look, if you've read anything about companies that have excelled, to a large extent, you start in the low hanging fruit, you drive your cost structure down. And then when your cost structure is so low from the technology platform, then you start to go into adjacent markets. In this case, if the adjacent market is effectively auto, and that obviously is something years down the road that can be an incremental opportunity for them, and something that they've had, that was their original experience, right? That's what they originally were attempting to do in most cases.
And I got to give Aurora credit. Aurora made a very big strategic move. Today at 12 p.m., Aurora filed a petition with the court to revisit the FMCSA, its federal motor carriers, unreasonable denial to use their innovative flashlight warning system with the goal of having the warning triangle denial overturned. That's right. They petitioned the court to deny and overturn this warning triangle denial nonsense. If they succeed, it goes back to the Trump's DOT. Hopefully they give them the warning triangle exemption. Away we go. That was a big strategic move by Aurora. They're growing up. What do you think of that move?
Yeah, I mean, I thought there was an agent, not an agency, but like an industry group that was going to take the head here. So good for them, and kind of taking the lead on this. That whole thing, honestly, it just seems silly to me. Like literally, I got off the red eye, was heading back, coming up 680. In the last podcast I talked about 95. This time I'm coming up 684 near the White Plains Airport, so just south of there. Once it was crack of dawn, obviously, trucks parked on the side of the road where the drivers are clearly taking an overnight nap, and not only no triangles, they didn't even have their blinkers on. So, and I see this consistently. There's no enforcement. I think it's just an issue the industry will deal with one way or another. So I think we just need to, and look, at the end of the day, like these guys are not getting to scale like these trucking autonomy companies like tomorrow. So they can have workarounds in the interim to do the proof points of driver out, so they can go to the next step and work with the trucking companies to go to, by the time you get to the point where Amazon or whoever the end customer is buying a shit ton of your trucks, it'll be resolved one way or another, because then you've got, broader things at play that I think the government will understand, especially under the Trump administration.
The Trump administration is very bullish on autonomy in general. Next week, the Council for Economic Resilience is hosting a cocktail party in DC, and we have a very special guest who'll be joining us. We won't reveal here publicly. We'll reveal after. But if you're interested in joining us to have a conversation around autonomy, automation, and the future of the U.S. economy, drop me a note on X. We're welcome to join us next week. Walt will be there, so you can ask Walt all your pending questions. And Walt, we had feedback from a YouTuber this week, Josh Gold. He brought up an episode of Jason Calcanis's This Week in Startups, and he wanted us to share an opinion, specifically yours, Walt. You're becoming famous here. I heard all about the CES shenanigans. He wants your opinion, and I'll chime in on this, about the possibility of Waymo buying Uber or merging, Amazon buying Uber, Tesla buying Uber, or Amazon buying Lyft and merging it into Zooks. This is for Josh Gold, not Ari Gold. That would have been cool, but for Josh Gold. Walt, the floor is yours.
I mean, look, anything can happen. The power of Uber is that it's global, And, if you're Waymo, you are also global. That's the kind of goal here. I just think that, look, operation number one, I think there was some videos out here, is the getting to scale. And I think there was like football fields of Waymo cars that are waiting to get outfitted. How many cars you necessarily need in a market to provide like an app only service? So I think, and then the question is like, how important is the app? This goes back to episode 1 and 2 and 3, if you want to re-listen to it, where you and I debated this and we've gone back and forth. How important is the app? What Uber and Lyft will say is like, oh, we have to match all the supply and demand, but like, okay, but if I'm Waymo and I have a fleet, I don't have to match the supply, right? I own the supply. So like that algo on that side of it. Now, great, there might be demand issues in terms of sending my cars and pathing, but I'm going to go back to where you almost had me convinced in episode 1 and 2, but I'm going back to like, it's Google, it's Amazon. I'm not sure that hurdle over a 5-year period, which is what it's going to take them to get to scale in the first place before they even have to make this decision, is going to be that much of a hurdle. If I'm wrong, what's this person's name again?
Josh Gold.
If I'm wrong, Josh, and that app is a hurdle, then sure, like go out and buy Lyft or whatever. At that point, you probably already have driven their stocks down because you've taken high value rides to the airports, and the investors are concerned about, not necessarily that you're going to kill them altogether, but just taking out X percent of their business. They're taking away their growth opportunity in terms of how these things, might be valued, whether it's 1 times or 3 times, as Kalkanis was talking about, 1 times revenue or 3 times, as Kalkanis and his guest were talking about. Sure, like maybe you buy them at some point down the road, but that was the exact shtick that I heard from cable companies when they were going to launch. They launched their wireless MVNO, and they were going to drive the wireless companies down, stop valuations down, and then they'd pick up T-Mobile on the cheap because this is how that was done in Europe. And what do we have today? T-Mobile is in a position where they could buy Comcast and they can buy Charter. So like T-Mobile, which was the target, is now the potential buyer of the companies that were going to theoretically buy them before. So I think that is probably the bigger risk that exists out there. The way this market, I think, is going to evolve, it's more of Uber and Lyft doing whatever they can. And again, this was, the presence of Uber, whether there or not, was clear, making sure that all of these other technology options, people that are partnering with OEMs, providing some level of fragmentation in the market beyond just what Waymo and theoretically Tesla has, is going to be important as an alternative. And they can coexist, but they definitely are going to need, I think, an autonomy component to it. And that's going to require, companies beyond Waymo and Tesla existing. So in short, that was a long explanation. No, that's not, I don't think, going to happen in the near term.
I agree with your assessment, and I have this question. Does Uber, to survive, have to become the everything app?
So it's so funny you say that, because like that was, you go back to the Expedia speculation, let's call it, which we talked about again on this episode, I think 5, that might have been. Like the narrative of Uber when it was on its rise was like, okay, what's next? What's our growth? And like Dara's got like this great opportunity to make this the super app. And even one of my predictions last year, I'm like, they're going to do a wireless MVNO and bundle all this stuff. Now it's almost like, well, they got to refocus, like forget about the super app. Now it's like, what defense mechanisms do we have to how there is concern in the market about how autonomy is going to impact our business? You have a couple of analysts at the start of the year, like, oh, your call of the year is Uber's this, this great long, and so you maybe alleviate concern for a day or two. Don't let that fool you. This is an overhang for these stocks over the balance of the year. And you have to consider, wait, what is the next headline that's going to hit, and how is it going to be perceived to the extent, if you're an Uber, or Lyft investor, as a future risk.
On Lyft's Q1 earnings call, are they going to have to address this overhang and this autonomy risk?
This is going to be top of mind on every earnings call. So I think they're going to have to go beyond that and make some announcements. And again, I think, in process, right? Again, I think, saying this the 3rd time, more so Uber, but I'm sure Lyft is still, is similar. Their footprint was evident in their engagement with the autonomy community, just based on all the discussions, that we were having.
You had a lot of discussions at CES this year. Any key takeaways to share with the audience?
Well, my key takeaway, Grayson, was ChatGPT is great in terms of doing research on the spot. But what's even better is the road to autonomy, because all I do is I go to the YouTube channel, Road to Autonomy. I'm like, oh, I'm about to meet with this person. Let's see if Grayson has met with anyone at the company. To put it in the search thing, and 9 times out of 10, there's something in the Road to Autonomy library that doesn't exist anywhere else, where I can, educate myself for 30 to 45 minutes, whatever it is. I think I can listen to you at like a 1.4 with some of your guests. Some of your guests were a little bit hard to understand, so I had to slow it down to like a 1.1 or a 1.2. So wonderful library to have and assets. So thank you for that. I think, look, we've covered a lot of stuff, but one of the more interesting things that had some tongues wagging, had a lot of interesting people at our party, which is mostly media, but we had some good autonomy presence there. But was what I'm calling the Bigelow Battle, which was a panel where you had the co-founder of Wabi, Raquel, the co-founder of Aurora, Sterling Anderson. By the way, I think both MIT, super smart, like love both presentations. But, Wabi's an end-to-end solution, and Aurora, I forget the exact words. Sterling is very kind of articulate in how he describes what they're doing, and like, well, if you don't want a car like crashing into you, it became better than most panels. And most panels are just generic kind of stuff. I think all the panels were actually pretty good, but this one was particularly good because there was a little bit of back and forth that existed there between the two companies. So that was fun.
I watched the Bigelow battle. Pete, buddy, you did a great job. Sterling, sir, as I said to your team, you deserve the golden gloves. You did good. You articulated it. And well, I'm not a police officer. I don't understand a lot of things, but boy, that body language during that got tense. That got intense there, back and forth. That body language was changing a little bit.
Yeah, I liked it. I mean, that's good. I think, again, both extremely smart people. That's the one thing that really impressed me on all the people I met. Not that not that telecom people are not smart, and not that the rocket scientists that I've met historically are not smart, but I mean, they're solving really tough problems here, and it was just great to have access to to all these different people, and I'd love to go toe to toe with Sterling at some point and push back on some of his assumptions and see how it goes. What do you think? How would I do?
I think you do great. Well, let's have Sterling on. Jake, I know you listen, buddy. Set it up. Let's have Sterling on Autonomy Markets. Well, you had a very successful party. Chuck Price, who sends me detailed notes, Chuck, I love you, who you met at your party, gave me detailed notes and said you had a very great party. Should we do something for 2026? Because I heard a little interesting stuff, and it seems like there's an opportunity in the market for us to do something big next year.
We'll have to take that. We got a lot of time between now and then to get it done, but I don't know. I mean, yeah, like I said, we had another great one this year. Glad we could sprinkle in a little bit more tech, what's typically been more of kind of a media telecom type focus. So we'll see how it goes for next year.
All right. Well, and I'm just going to say that, yeah, we're going to do something. What we're going to do, don't know.
Okay. You're saying yes. You're saying definitively yes. I love it.
I am putting a marker down and saying definitively yes.
Well, here's what we got to do, though, because no one wants to travel far from basically west. So we got to find something relatively close to west to make it convenient, embrace everyone, bring them all in, have a great salon of discussion in the world of autonomy. There is so much stuff that's going to happen over the course of the year. There'll be so much fun stuff. And hopefully we'll be celebrating and toasting many different companies for having achieved driver out, maybe some LiDAR companies that have gotten new market share wins. Autonomy Markets is going to be a big tent where we want to invite everyone in. No one is excluded. We're willing to think about every business model, whether it's end to end, whether you need LiDAR, whether you're whatever. You're all invited.
We love a big tent. Everybody's invited. I'll even pass out Make Autonomy Great hats.
I don't know about that, Grayson. I mean, we at some point you got to. Have you sold any of those hats yet?
A few.
Well, I do look forward to next week in DC. That's very valuable discussions. Great lineup of people. I won't reveal your special guest, but every one of these meetings, people obviously recognize the importance of the regulatory angle in this. So, and like I've lived that world in telecom as well. So, be doing some other meetings down there as well. But our government's obviously going to play an important role in getting this thing off the ground.
It will play an important role, and I got to end on a light note. Law enforcement plays a very important role in the future of autonomy. There was a suspect, I'll use the politically correct term, goes into the grocery store, robs a grocery store, gets out his phone, Walt, calls a Waymo as the getaway car, and as my daughter goes, the wee-woos, the police siren came over, the Waymo pulled over, guy got arrested. Who the heck robs a grocery store for starters? The margins are less than 2%. And who the heck uses a Waymo as a getaway vehicle? This is another only in LA mo, and people try and steal them. What's next?
Well, I'm gonna take a serious note out of this, in that the market perception then of Waymos is that you don't have to wait a long time. I mean, there's people out there that are criticizing like, oh, no one wants to wait that long for a Waymo. Here's a guy that for a getaway car was willing to wait for the Waymo. I mean, now granted, I'm guessing that his thought process, or her, I don't know what the perp was, oh, if I do a Waymo, then I'm not going to have a witness to the crime because there's no one driving, not conceptualizing that like his ID is actually getting to call the car. But the positive here, Waymo might want to use this as an advertisement. Like, look, even robbers that are trying to get away from things, they're satisfied with our wait times. So enough with the criticisms of the wait times.
If you want to rob a store and get caught and not wait, call a Waymo. That's the ad.
Yeah, let's not say that. Let's not remind them that they got caught.
Well, in LA, you got a slap on the wrist and you got let go. So there you go. But I digress. That's a political topic.
Yeah, exactly. That's a very good point. It is California. So if the guy was busted, he was probably released on the spot. You'll never see that guy again.
He was with a ticket, and a fine, and you'll see him trying to rob a store again in another Waymo because criminals never seem to learn their lessons. Walt, outside of the Council for Economic Resilience event next week, what do we need to look for in the markets?
That is the event of the week. But no, I think there's going to be, CES, there's going to be a lot of, notes from investor, sell-side analysts. You're going to see writing up like a lot of the stuff that we talked about and other issues. You're going to see the bias of some of the Tesla lovers and the Tesla haters and, the spin. We try and give you accurate depictions, as I always say, and everyone I met there. And for those of you that came up to me and recognized me from Autonomy Markets, thank you. That was very flattering. I loved it. But also continue to give feedback, give us ideas to talk about on the podcast, and we'd be happy to address them. Always willing to reconsider what, I don't think I ever have. I try not to have dug in conclusions on things, as you've heard us talk about LiDAR and some of this, will Uber and Lyft, have some differentiation or not. So keep giving us that feedback. It's been awesome.
Yeah, keep it coming. Josh Gold, thanks so much for the note. And for all our listeners each and every week, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for going and saying hi to Walt. Sorry I wasn't there this year, but I'll be there next year. And for those listeners and viewers, we'll see you in DC next week. The future is bright. The future autonomous. The future is scaling autonomy. Walt, until next week.